All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be trying to make sense of all this talk about anti-democratic actions and, what we can actually do about it.
And we're going to do that with the help of someone who knows a thing or two about resistance movements, Rebecca Chenoweth.
Exactly. Chenoweth is like one of the leading experts in this field. And get this, our source material for today is an interview they did with Rebecca Solnit.
Published just last week, February 8th.
2025, yeah. Now, some of you have probably heard of Chenoweth's work, specifically that 3.5% rule.
Oh, right. That only 3.5% of a population needs to actively resist to create serious political change.
Yeah, that one. Sounds pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
But like most things, it's a little more complicated when you look under the hood.
Yeah, it's not just about hitting a magic number. Chenoweth really emphasizes that successful movements actually need a lot more than that.
Like what?
Well, they need clear goals, a good plan, strategy,
Yeah.
and they've got to be able to keep the momentum going, keep people engaged over time.
Okay, so let's break that down. What does that actually look like? I mean, in the real world, what are we talking about?
Well, Chenoweth points out that we need to understand how power actually works.
Okay, seems pretty basic.
Hmm.
But how does that help us resist authoritarianism?
Well, it's interesting because sometimes these authoritarian figures, the ones that we're worried about, they actually reveal their own weaknesses when they attack institutions.
I mean,
Like, think about it. When someone like, let's say, Elon Musk or even Donald Trump, when they go after things like the free press or, the justice system,
yeah.
it actually shows that they understand that they can't get what they want without the people in those systems cooperating.
Oh, I see. So they're kind of admitting that they need those systems to work, even as they're trying to dismantle them?
Exactly. They rely on our cooperation, which is where the power of civil resistance comes in.
Okay, so how does that translate to actually protecting democracy?
Well, Chenoweth talks about how important it is to defend those core principles, like protecting the people who are most vulnerable and upholding the rule of law.
Even when it feels like those in power are just ignoring it, basically.
Right, because that's how we maintain a functioning democracy. We don't let them erode those foundations.
It's not just about fighting back. It's about defending the very systems that we rely on.
Exactly. And that brings us to this idea that Chenoweth talks about, building a deeper level of coordination within civil society.
Hold on, civil society. Now, for those of us who aren't, political science experts, what does that even mean?
Right. Yeah, it's a bit of a jargony term. Basically, it means all those organizations and groups that operate outside of, the government or businesses.
Like what? Give us some examples.
So think about your local community groups, nonprofits, those advocacy organizations, unions. Basically, it's all these different groups of people who come together to work on issues that they care about.
So Chenoweth is saying we need all those groups to work together better, more strategically.
Yeah, they have this idea of a United Democratic Alliance.
A United Democratic Alliance.
Yeah, like a powerful force of pro-democracy groups from all walks of life.
So we're not just talking about protests in the streets or signing online petitions.
No, just that, no. It's bigger. Chenoweth actually talks about how we need all sorts of skills, not just, getting people out there.
Give some examples of what else they think is important.
Oh, they mentioned communication, right, making sure everyone is on the same page, getting the message out there. And then education, helping people understand what's at stake, what they can do. Information gathering is another big one.
Yeah, knowing what's going on and, sharing that information.
Right, and then there's mutual aid, supporting each other, building strong communities. And even they talk about the potential of, creating alternative institutions.
Wow, alternative institutions.
Yeah, think about it like this. Imagine building a movement with all these different branches and each one playing a crucial role.
Right, using different tools for different jobs.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about reacting to to what those in power are doing.
So it's got to be proactive. What are we building towards?
That's the thing, right? Building a better future. And it's important to remember, Chenoweth reminds us, we're not alone in facing these challenges. What we're seeing right now, it's part of a global trend.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, well, political scientists have a term for it. It's called democratic backsliding.
Democratics backsliding. So we're going backwards on the playground slide.
Yeah, kind of. It's when countries that were moving towards being more democratic, they start to see a decline in democratic values and institutions.
So how do we stop from sliding all the way down?
Well, Chenoweth actually points to some pretty inspiring examples from history to show that it can be done. Like, one that really stood out to me was what happened in Serbia back in 2000.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that one.
So Slobodan Milosevic, the leader at the time, he was pretty authoritarian, and he tried to steal an election.
Classic.
Right. But these civil society groups, they were ready for it. They had organized this parallel vote count.
So smart.
And when they showed everyone that the election had been rigged, people took to the streets. It was massive. And eventually, Milosevic was forced to resign.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Shows that, even when things look really bad, people can actually make a difference.
For sure. And there's another example. It's a classic one, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa in the 80s.
Yeah, that was a long fight.
Right. They built this incredible coalition over years, and they used all sorts of tactics. They had huge protests, and they organized boycotts, and general strikes, which basically shut down the country.
So they put real economic pressure on the government.
Exactly. They basically crippled the apartheid regime financially, and that eventually forced them to negotiate and actually transition to a democracy.
Amazing. These stories are so inspiring, especially, considering those attempts by people like Elon Musk to rewrite history. But I got to say, this idea of democratic backsliding, it's a little unsettling. I mean, knowing it's happening all over the world.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a worrying trend. But the good news is we can learn from the successes, and even the failures of those who've been through this before. And that's exactly what Chenoweth's work helps us do.
Okay, so let's get into that. What are some of those lessons? What can people do today to push back against this backsliding?
Well, remember that United Democratic Alliance we were talking about? Chenoweth really stresses the importance of building those broad coalitions.
Right, bringing everyone together.
Yeah, like everyone who cares about democracy, even if they have different political views or backgrounds, it's about finding common ground.
It's bigger than just national level politics. What about things people can do in their own communities?
Well, think about those things we were talking about before. Protecting vulnerable people, upholding the rule of law, supporting those organizations that are doing the work on the ground to strengthen our institutions.
So stuff like volunteering at a legal aid clinic, donating to a voting rights group, or even just speaking out against injustice whenever we see it.
Exactly. All those things matter, especially when they're part of a bigger movement. Think back to those historical examples we talked about. They didn't happen overnight.
People had to be really dedicated and work at it for a long time.
That's it. They were committed to making a difference, and that's what it takes.
Yeah, it's really powerful to think about those people who helped make those movements happen.
That's like we all have a role to play, right?
It's interesting. Chenoweth actually brings up another example from history in this interview, and it's one that's a little closer to home this time.
Oh, really? Which one?
They mentioned this guy, Reverend Dr. James Lawson. He was a major figure in the civil rights movement.
Oh, yeah, of course. Dr. Lawson. His work on, strategic nonviolent resistance was so important back then.
Totally. And Chenoweth actually quotes Lawson talking about all the resources activists have available to them today, compared to back then.
What did he say? I'm curious.
It was something like, you all have books on strategy and training manuals and institutes that specialize in teaching this stuff, and you have hundreds of historical examples to learn from. You are lucky.
Wow. That's really something coming from someone who went through what he did during the civil rights era.
I know, right? Chenoweth even mentions that when Lawson was planning the Nashville desegregation campaign, all he had to work with was Gandhi's autobiography and the Bible.
That really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? We have so much more information and support available to us today.
It does. It makes you realize that, knowledge really is power, like Lawson said.
Speaking of knowledge, we were talking about that 3.5% rule earlier. It's kind of a controversial idea, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really easy to misunderstand. Just because, 3.5% of people participate, it doesn't mean a movement is going to succeed automatically.
Exactly. Chenoweth's really clear about that. It's just an average based on what they've seen in the past, not some kind of magic formula.
Right. And they've actually published research specifically warning people not to oversimplify the rule.
Yeah, I've seen that. They point out that the movements they studied all had very specific goals, overthrowing a government or achieving independence.
Yeah, we can't just assume those same findings will apply to every kind of movement or reform effort, right?
Exactly. It's all about context. But even with those, caveats, I still think the 3.5% rule can be a powerful motivator.
I agree. It gives us a sense of, how much potential there is for collective action. But we can't forget about all the other stuff that matters, too, like strategy and good leadership and, the commitment to keep going over the long haul.
For sure. It all goes back to Chenoweth's main point about the power of civil society to make real change.
So where do we go from here? Like, how do we actually become a part of this United Democratic Alliance that Chenoweth's talking about?
Well, this is interesting. Chenoweth ends the interview by bringing up this group called the Crowd Counting Consortium.
Wait, isn't that the organization that keeps track of all those big protests?
Yeah.
Like the Women's March and stuff? What does that have to do with building a movement?
Yeah, that's the one. Chenoweth's suggesting that all that data they're collecting could actually tell us a lot about how resistance movements are doing all over the world.
I hadn't thought about it like that. You mean like seeing where people are organizing and what they're doing could reveal some important trends?
Exactly. Like, imagine having a real-time map of the global fight for democracy. We could see how fast movements are growing, what strategies are working, maybe even anticipate where things might get really intense.
That'd be amazing. We could see which tactics are actually effective, where support is growing, and where people need the most help.
And it could even help us connect with other groups and individuals who are fighting for the same things we are, like a global network of resistance.
That's a powerful idea. I mean, data can be such a valuable tool for understanding and shaping social change.
No doubt. And it's something that Chenoweth is clearly really passionate about.
Thinking back to those historical examples we were talking about, it's amazing how much we can learn from the past.
I know. History is like this roadmap, It helps us understand how power works and how ordinary people can achieve incredible things.
But it also reminds us that the fight for democracy never really ends. Like, there will always be challenges and setbacks along the way.
That's why it's so important to stay informed, stay engaged, and connect with people who share our values.
We can't just sit back and assume everything will be okay. The future of democracy really does depend on us getting involved and making our voices heard.
And that's why Chenoweth's work is so important. They give us the knowledge and the tools we need to actually make a difference.
Speaking of knowledge, there's this great quote that Chenoweth uses to close out their conversation with Lawson. They said, people have agency no matter what happens, and knowledge is power.
Ooh, that's a good one. It's a reminder that even when things seem impossible, we still have the power to change things.
It all starts with recognizing our own agency, educating ourselves, and taking action, even if it seems like a small thing.
And like we've seen from those historical examples, even small acts of resistance can have a huge impact, inspiring others and contributing to bigger movements for change.
Exactly. It starts with each of us realizing that we have power, and then using that power to build a better future.
And who knows, maybe the crowd counting consortium will give us even more insight into what the movements of the future will look like and how we can navigate all the challenges ahead.
That's an exciting thought, and it's so empowering to know that we have the tools and the knowledge to make a real difference.
So let's take that knowledge, that sense of agency, and use it to build a more just and equitable world for everyone.
It's true, knowledge is power, but only if you actually use it.
Right. Like, it's not enough to just, understand how power works. We actually have to use that knowledge to defend our democracies, make them stronger.
Okay, so let's do like a quick recap just so everyone's on the same page. We started this whole deep dive talking about how these authoritarian figures, they actually expose their weaknesses when they go after things like democratic institutions.
Yeah, because they're basically showing us that they need those institutions, right? They need our cooperation.
And that's where the power of civil society comes in.
Yeah.
Remember Chenoweth talking about a United Democratic Alliance?
Oh, yeah, that's right. A big coalition.
Exactly. All of these different groups and individuals coming together. And they're all, they're working to protect those democratic values and institutions.
And we saw how that kind of collective action can be really effective, right? Think about those examples, Serbia, South Africa.
Powerful stuff. But it's not all about these big historical movements. It's also about what each of us can do in our own communities.
Oh, absolutely. And Chenoweth, they remind us that there's so much we can do. Protecting vulnerable people, upholding the rule of law, supporting those organizations that are out there, working to strengthen our institutions.
And there was that 3.5% rule, right?
Yeah.
Which we talked about how it's more like a guiding principle, not a hard and fast rule.
Exactly. It's about the potential impact when lots of people participate. But we can't forget about strategy, good leadership and being in it for the long haul.
And we ended on that really interesting point about the crowd counting consortium, right? And how all that data that they're collecting could actually help us understand those resistance movements that are happening all over the world.
Yeah, it's like, imagine if we could map the global fight for democracy, We could see where things are working, where they're struggling, what strategies are proving effective.
And it could help us connect with others who are fighting for those same things.
Exactly.
It's been a really thought-provoking deep dive, and I gotta say, I'm feeling a lot more, well, hopeful than I was when we started.
Yeah, me too, actually. I think that's the power of Chenoweth's work. It doesn't just analyze the problems. It gives us, like, a path forward.
Absolutely. And to bring it all back to you, our listener, remember that quote from Chenoweth's conversation with Reverend Dr. James Lawson?
Oh, yeah, the one about agency.
That's the one.
Hmm.
People have agency no matter what happens, and knowledge is power.
So powerful. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of democracy.
That's right. So let's take that knowledge, that sense of agency, and let's get to work,
Yeah.
building a more just and equitable world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.